Hello there, it's Tom here, and this is Gunnerkrigg Court, Chapter 48, Tall Tales. And for this one I'm going to try something a bit different, and the reason for that being that after 48 videos of talking about my comic, it sometimes gets a bit hard to think of new things to say rather than rehashing old ground and going over the same stuff. So this time I've got my wife Magnolia here, and she is going to help me get through this video and possibly future videos. Since it turns out she actually reads the comic, she might be able to pose a few questions that I can then answer.
Hello there. So this chapter starts with 3 new characters who we haven't seen before. Who are these guys?
Okay, so this chapter primarily focuses on this fairy, this jackalope, and this kind of weird looking pink guy who is actually a canvey monster, which is just an obscure little folk tale from southeast of England. And in this chapter they're all travelling together for some meeting. And as they're travelling to this meeting, they're sharing stories of who they think the new medium is.
I always thought that it was an interesting touch that the canvey monster imagines Annie having gills and webbed fingers like he has.
Yeah, and that's because these stories that they're telling are going to be from the perspective of the creatures in the forest. And the stories are just going to be a result of the rumours that this guy's heard of Annie's exploits in the forest. And of course the unnamed fairy here is a bit sceptical about the facts that he's presenting.
So this page is showing a little bit about Camlin, whose story is more fully told in Annie in the Forest, and I always wonder what people think of these little nods to him if they haven't read Annie in the Forest. When you include him in the main comic, are you writing for people who have read it, or is it more for people who may not know the full story?
Well, just so people know, this green guy here is basically a depiction of a character that was in one of the side stories. And so I thought it might be interesting if people who haven't read the side stories, they are being presented with the same information that the fairy is being presented. And based on his previous story and the upcoming other rumours that he's spreading, they can decide for themselves whether they think what he's telling is true or not. And then there's always some extra material for them to go off and read if they really want to look into it. So when the fairy tells her little story, it is actually something that happened in chapter 42, but the canvey monster doesn't believe her. And so the two of them finally arrive at the meeting point.
This is a different part of the forest than we normally see.
It certainly is. It is. It's directly based on a section of Central Park in New York called the Tree Mall. When I visited in person, I thought it would be a perfect place for a gathering like this to happen. And we see that other creatures have come to the meeting as well, and we see Annie, Sengrun, and Coyote all from afar, and I wanted to leave the perspective of the chapter from the point of view of the creatures, because they're really the ones that are observing the strange thing that is happening in their forest.
Both Annie and Parley have new outfits for this chapter. I was wondering if you just had any thoughts on how you designed those.
Well, designing the outfits is probably one of my favourite parts of working on each individual chapter. And Parley's outfit is just meant to evoke the Dragon Slayer armour that Eglamour wears. And it's sort of a medium between her training outfit and her official armour. Because she's not fully installed as the court's protector, she's just wearing a kind of a semi-formal version of the armour. And Annie's dress is supposed to evoke not only the style of the tree elves, but also the covering that Sengrun wears. And the shape of the dress, I just wanted it to look a little bit like a 60s go-go dress with her boots and slim cut to it. So Annie gets down to the business of introducing Andrew and Parley, and
this is the first time Parley has seen Sengrun again since that very early chapter, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's why when she's looking at him, the thing she remembers is when he kind of freaked out in the meeting hall, all the way back in chapter 14. But now she's really at the point where she's presenting herself as his counterpart to the forest. And Annie shows off a little bit, I suppose, for the creatures, since really she is here to be someone that they can come and talk to.
Is that creature partying with the canvey monster a fairy?
Oh no, she's just some old forest lady. And so Coyote gets the proceedings underway, and we skip forward a little to the party time so that we can get back to the story of the fairy and the canvey monster and her jackalope friend here. And all throughout the chapter, the fairy has been a little morose, and she explains that it's because her rabbit friend here wants to leave and go to live in the court.
Do you think the canvey monster and the fairy stayed in touch after this chapter?
Probably not. I kind of wanted it to seem that the creatures all getting together are just passing by each other, and they might know each other and talk to one another for the duration of the meeting, but it's kind of like animals passing other animals in the forest. They don't really form any connection, so I never really imagined that after this they became good buds or anything. So the fairy explains that she's come to talk to the mediums, and the Canvey monster relishes the thought of being able to come with her, kind of like getting to hang out with the new local celebrities.
So you've had lots of fairy characters and kind of lore about them over the years, but in the comic we've really only seen Red and Blue, who are kind of atypical examples. So were you excited to kind of show a little more of a more typical forest fairy with this character?
Yeah. It's been briefly mentioned a couple times in the comic, I think in some bonus pages and possibly some background dialogue, that the fairies in the Gunnerkrigg universe don't have wings and they actually had to construct them themselves. So here I was showing that, with the green-haired fairy here showing off her kind of ratty wings that she would have made at some point.
What would she have made them out of?
Oh, they can make the wings out of anything, really. So, for example, in Chapter 42, Smitty helps out one of the fairies by giving them a candy wrapper, which they can then use to make some wings. So, as for the green-haired fairy's wings here, it would have just been made out of stuff she found in the forest, and they can basically transmute whatever they want into their wings. And another part of the lore of these fairies that I wanted to bring back up was they seem to have strange rituals regarding their names. And in this particular case, the fairy mentions that her name is a secret and she doesn't want to share it. And then she explains that the rabbit wants to come over to the court and go through the process of changing from an animal into a human.
I remember when this page came up, people seemed interested in the fact that the rabbit or the jackalope will change gender when it becomes human, but my assumption was always that an animal would not have the same conception of gender that a person has, and that just changing species is already such a huge change that it wouldn't seem to matter to them that much.
That's pretty much it, yeah, and that is something that will be brought up again in a future chapter. But what's important to the fairy and her friend here is that she gets to become more than what she is. As an animal in the forest, she's pretty limited by her physical state, and they're not exactly conveying it here because they're not too sure themselves, but the rabbit at least knows that by becoming human she might be capable of more. But this of course means that she'll be leaving the forest and her fairy friend behind. The fairy being worried that once she changes to a new body, she will have lost all her previous memories and the memories of her friendship. And I did this to mirror the concerns that Annie had a few chapters ago, when she felt that Kat was probably drifting away from her, and she was concerned about how it might affect their friendship. But Annie resolves to see if they can bring the newly made human back into the forest, which really is all the fairy needed to make her feel better about the situation. And in this last page here, I wanted to end on a picture of the rabbit shedding a tear to show that the rabbit has really understood what has been going on this whole time. Because as essentially a regular rabbit, she is not capable of any expression or able to talk or really able to give any indication that she has been aware of the proceedings going around her. But by ending on the rabbit and the fairy being sad, I wanted to really show that the rabbit is cognizant of everything that's been going on. And so in this bonus page, I wanted to show that Annie has basically confirmed the Canvey's monsters' stories without really knowing what she's admitting to. And not only that, she's also dropped some information that will very clearly be distorted in some other future story.
It's just a small background detail, but I like to see Smitty playing with the rabbit, since he mentioned in a previous chapter that he doesn't really get to see animals very much, so it's nice he gets that opportunity.
And that's that. And thanks to Magnolia for helping me out.
You're very welcome.
And come back again for chapter 49, The Torn Sea.
Bye!